Hey guys, do you ever find yourself in the mood for a nice, creepy little game only to remember that you're broke and the economy sucks? Or maybe you have a little cash, but you're so busy adulting that you don't have the time to sink 40 hours into a gaming session. Well, I'm pretty sure we've all been there, but today I think I may have the solution to your problem. Recently I've been poking around Steam doing a little bit of horror gaming, and so I thought that today I'd share with you guys some of the brief, budget-friendly titles I've come across that'll give you some satisfying scares without breaking the bank. So today, if you'll join me, I'd like to talk about 10 short horror games. I've listed them here in no particular order, and I'm going to be giving each of these titles a rating out of 10. The criteria that I'm going to be using is pretty simple. The scarier and more enjoyable the game is, the higher the rating will be. The less enjoyable and the less frightening, the lower the score will be. So yeah, not exactly rocket science. And if you guys have any suggestions for games that you think should be on this list, definitely feel free to let me know in the comments. Anyway, without further ado, let's take a look at 10 short horror games. Alright, so first up on our list is the 2023 title Slay the Princess. And the premise of this one is extremely simple. You're on a path in the woods, and at the end of that path is a cabin, and in the basement of that cabin is a princess. In order to save the world, all you have to do is slay her. That's it. Just slay the princess. Sounds pretty simple, right? Well, as it turns out, slaying the princess is much easier said than done. Not only can she hold her own in battle, but she'll pretty much say and do anything in order to convince you not to slay her. And the longer you speak with her, the more compelling her arguments will seem. Like all of the titles on this list, Slay the Princess is a pretty short little game. You can actually beat it in around 20 to 30 minutes. But the fun with this one doesn't just come from beating the game, it comes from replaying it. Since pretty much every action you take has a direct consequence, you'll find yourself wanting to play it over and over again just to see how the different choices that you make will affect the world and characters. The game also gives you a surprising amount of leeway to play exactly the way you want to. If you decide to slay the princess, you can. Well, you can attempt to anyway. Or if you decide that you'd rather side with her and save the princess instead, you can also do that. You can even choose to walk away from the whole situation and refuse to have anything to do with the princess at all. One of the coolest aspects of this game is that depending on the decisions you make, the settings around you will start to change and shift, almost like a dream reflecting the path that you've chosen. And more interesting still is how your decisions affect the princess herself. Her personality will completely change based on how you approach her. If you treat her with kindness and empathy, she'll behave like your typical damsel in distress. Well, more or less anyway. If you come at her with violence, you'll reap a horrifying result. She changes so drastically from one playthrough to another that you'll find yourself wondering which iteration of the character is the real princess, or if she's just manipulating you in every scenario that you encounter. It's fascinating to see how a game with such an apparently limited setting and premise is able to offer such a diversely entertaining experience. My one criticism of the game is that there aren't as many endings as you'd expect. The path to the end of the game can be interesting and unique enough, but in my experience, just about every path you choose ends up leading to the same conclusion, so that was a little disappointing. But the overall experience is still pretty cool. The writing is fantastic, the artwork looks great, and the voice acting is spot on all across the board. Even if you're not typically into visual novels, I would definitely recommend giving this game a try just because of how unique and effective it is. Overall, I'd give Slay the Princess 8.5 murdered monarchs out of 10. And speaking of unique and effective games, next on our list is the 2020 title, The Convenience Store. According to Steam, this one is a J-horror game about a college girl on a night shift. And that's a pretty honest description of this game's contents. The Convenience Store is essentially a short little job simulator with a freaky twist. You play as a nameless college student who spends a few nights working at the titular convenience store, completing tasks such as throwing out expired food, restocking shelves, and dealing with annoying customers. But the typical trials and tribulations of working a 9-to-5 aren't your only challenges. You also have to deal with an increasingly restless paranormal entity. This title originally drew me in because something about a job simulator set in a Japanese convenience store just really appeals to me. Also, as a fan of J-horror, I was hoping for a dark, atmospheric game with some typical J-horror elements, and the convenience store definitely did not disappoint. The scares in this game are some of the best out of any title on this list. They're built up extremely well, and there are enough of them that they keep the gameplay experience fresh and interesting at pretty much every turn. The deceptively bright and cheery setting serves as a stark contrast to the dark events that your character witnesses throughout her shifts, and that only makes the scares that much more effective. My two main gripes with this game are the navigation and the television puzzle. As for the navigation, the events of the convenience store take place over the course of 4 nights, and for the first 3 you're expected to find your way from your apartment to the store. I found these sequences to be extremely annoying because the game is dark as shit during these parts, and the only thing you have to light your way is a flashlight that sucks ass. I mean, look at this. Does this look fun to you? Do you like the idea of stumbling around blindly in the dark while nothing interesting happens around you? If so, I guess you'll like this title better than I did. I mean, I guess the point is supposed to be that it would be kind of creepy in real life to be trying to walk to work in the middle of the night without a proper flashlight, but this is not real life. This is a video game, and forcing the player to bumble around in the dark just feels like pointless busy work and bad game design. As for the television puzzle, it's a bit better, but I still found it to be pretty annoying. On the game's 3rd night, the paranormal activity in the convenience store really starts heating up, and you start to see a ghostly figure of a child through the store's CCTV camera. A bunch of old school TVs appear all throughout the store, and the apparition will stop to watch several of them. Apparently, you're then supposed to walk through the aisles, turning on the television sets that the ghost indicated. The only problem is that it's almost impossible to make out which TV sets the ghost actually stops to look at. I mean, take a look at this. Can you tell which TV set the ghost is watching? With all of that being said though, I still really do like this title. No game is perfect, and the convenience store is obviously no exception. But if you're smarter than me and can figure out the navigation and the television puzzle, I would definitely recommend picking this one up and giving it a try. And if you like it, you're in luck. This game was released by a developer called Chilla's Art, which is apparently something of an expert in creating short retro J-horror games. They've got a pretty impressive library of titles as well as a dedicated cult following, and I will definitely be checking out a few more Chilla's Art games in the future. Overall, the convenience store gets 7 malevolent paranormal entities out of 10. Next up on our list is the 2023 title Cave Crawler. According to the game's description on the Steam store page, Cave Crawler is a short horror game where you pilot a drone into a cave and discover something horrible. It's a pretty simple premise that's executed quite well, and the result is a genuinely creepy little title. As the description on the Steam store mentioned, the bulk of the game involves piloting a small drone through a maze-like cave system. Your objective is to find the bodies of a number of unfortunate miners who've met gruesome fates within the tunnels. The game is divided up into 4 levels, and with each level that you clear, you're given a bit more backstory into the mining operation that led to the miners' deaths, as well as a bit of in-game lore about the company responsible for the whole situation. There are a few jump scares and eerie occurrences to encounter as you crawl through the caverns, and the game does have a decently freaky ending, so overall it's a pretty effective horror experience. My one big gripe with the game is the graphics. Despite being released in 2023, the visuals in this game look about on par with something that you'd expect to find in an N64 game. And normally that wouldn't bother me. I'm not a graphics snob by any stretch of the imagination, but unfortunately the poor quality visuals in this game really do hinder the gameplay experience. Just as an example, there's one point in Cave Crawler where you come upon a backpack belonging to one of the miners. It's meant to be an eerie little moment that makes you wonder where the owner of the backpack is and what happened to them. But the graphics are of such poor quality that the first time I saw the backpack, I just assumed that it was a rock and didn't really pay much attention to it. Worse still, the bodies in this game just look like nondescript red blobs, so the first time I came across the corpse of one of the miners, I didn't even realize what I was looking at. So again, the low quality graphics sort of hinder the overall experience, or at least they did for me. But even so, I found the game to be enjoyable enough, and the last level and ending are especially well executed. In terms of length, I logged less than an hour into this title and managed to complete the game, so it really doesn't demand much of your time. Overall, I'd say that Cave Crawler is a mixed bag with enough going for it that it's definitely worth checking out. This one gets 6.5 tragic minor deaths out of 10. Alright, next up on our list is the 2022 release, Mothmen 1966. This title first piqued my interest because I'm kind of into cryptozoology, and I find the stories of the Mothman to be some of the creepiest cryptid tales out there. For those of you who may not be familiar with this phenomenon, the Mothman is a figure that's allegedly been spotted by countless people throughout the years. But the most famous sightings of the Mothman occurred in the 1960s in the town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Over the course of about a year between 1966 and 1967, numerous people reported encountering a strange creature that appeared humanoid with enormous wings and hypnotic glowing red eyes. The creature was also apparently spotted at the site of a bridge collapse that killed 46 people in December of 1967. Now, full disclosure, even though I'm into cryptozoology, I don't really believe that most cryptids actually exist. And if they do, I think that for the most part they can be explained as misidentification of common animals. In the case of the Mothman, I think the creature that was spotted was most likely some kind of bird, but I still think it's fun to look at these stories and think, what if? Anyway, with that background in mind, let's take a closer look at Mothmen 1966. The Steam store describes this game as a pixel pulp visual novel fusing exceptional writing and stunning illustration, inspired by mid-20th century pulp fiction and 80s home computer graphics. So the game developers are really leaning into the pulp fiction angle in the marketing, which I think was a pretty smart move considering the game's contents. In this title, you follow 4 characters: a gas station owner named Holt, a writer named Lou, and 2 history students called Lee and Victoria, as they experience a series of frightening paranormal encounters. It's a short little title that only takes about an hour and a half to play through, and I'd say its strongest point is definitely the artwork. The game is absolutely gorgeous, and the beautiful pixel graphics go a long way toward establishing the title's dark, creepy mood. The writing is also fantastic, especially toward the beginning of the game, which has a distinct X-Files vibe. The character work is pretty well done all around, and it does a good job of drawing the player in and really making the characters come to life. Unfortunately, the writing gets a little worse toward the end of the game, but as far as I'm concerned, that can be forgiven considering the fact that it is a work of pulp fiction. Still, I wish that the game was just a little longer so that the story and characters could be fleshed out a bit better toward the game's climax and conclusion, both of which feel like they come out of nowhere. In terms of gameplay, Mothmen 1966 starts off as pretty much the bare minimum of what can be considered a video game. It's a visual novel with a few minigames peppered throughout the runtime that mostly tend to feel like busy work. However, as the game progresses, the minigames do get a bit more serious. You can die very easily if you choose the wrong option during one of the gameplay sequences, but fortunately, if you do die, the game also allows you to retry as many times as you want. So it's actually quite a forgiving title in that regard. The one beef I have with the game is that it's marketed as a choose-your-own-adventure, choices matter kind of title, but in reality, the game is pretty linear. I believe there are multiple endings to this one, but aside from that, the game pretty much feels like it's on rails. Still, this is one that I definitely recommend if you're just looking for a short little distraction with a creepy tone and decent writing. Overall, Mothmen 1966 gets 6.5 creepy cryptids out of 10. Next up, we have probably my favorite game on this list, the 2021 title Ghost in the Pool. In this Chinese-made manga-style game, you play as a first-year high school student named Yaru who begins to hear rumors that her school's swimming pool is haunted. I find Yaru's characterization to be pretty interesting because when you're first introduced to her, she kind of comes across as a negative, judgmental jerk who has nothing good to say about anyone around her. But as the game progresses, you start to understand little by little why she behaves the way she does. As it turns out, Yaru is something of a sports star, having won a citywide swimming championship when she was in junior high. As a result of that victory, she was given a sports scholarship to the city's most prestigious high school. But what should be a dream come true quickly turns into a nightmare as Yaru finds herself drowning academically, unable to keep up with her classes and increasingly worried about maintaining her sports scholarship. Essentially, Yaru feels as though swimming is her entire identity, and since competition at her new school is so stiff, she begins to spiral into self-doubt and feels as though her identity is slipping away. She's under an immense amount of pressure and feels a growing sense of powerlessness over her own life. Driven by her desperation to maintain her role as a swimming champion, she becomes hell-bent on using the school's swimming pool to practice at night, even though there are rumors that the pool is haunted. As you might imagine, supernatural shenanigans ensue. One thing I really like about this game is that it does a good job of blending the down-to-earth, real-life fears that Yaru experiences with more supernatural, Junji Ito-style horror. In terms of gameplay, Ghost in the Pool is more or less your standard point-and-click visual novel. But something that I think sets it apart from a lot of other titles in the genre is just the sheer amount of creepy imagery and ideas that are presented throughout the game. Ghost in the Pool is an extremely focused story, and at just about every point in the runtime, there's either something freaky to look at or the characters are talking about some kind of disturbing event that's happened at the school. If you're looking for a title that's quick to introduce its horror elements and manages to keep up a consistently eerie tone throughout, Ghost in the Pool is definitely a game that's worth checking out. My one major criticism is with the game's translation. It can be pretty janky, which unfortunately can make Ghost in the Pool either tough to understand or at times downright hilarious. As you can imagine, that kind of tends to ruin the dark, disturbing tone that the game developers were going for. But generally speaking, I think it's a pretty effective title. There are 3 possible endings to achieve, and since you can beat the game in about an hour and a half, there's a decent amount of replayability here. Overall, I'd give Ghost in the Pool 8.5 haunted bodies of water out of 10. And if you're not quite sick of Junji Ito-style visual novels, you might want to check out our next title, the 2023 release called Welcome to the Karoshi Club. This game definitely presents a different type of horror than any of the other games we're looking at today. First off, I had to look up the word karoshi, which is apparently a Japanese term meaning overworked to death. It comes from the sad reality of Japanese work culture, or I guess I should say overwork culture, which has tragically led to a number of deaths resulting from overwork and work-related stresses. In Welcome to the Karoshi Club, you play as a man named Kenji who's been out of work for a year and is trying desperately to find new employment. The goal of the game is fairly simple. Attend a job interview and try to convince the interviewer that you're the right fit for the role. There are some supernatural elements to the story, but by and large the focus of the game is on the job interview and the anxiety that Kenji feels both before and during the interview process. If you've ever been in the position of being out of work for any extended period of time and desperate to find a job, this game is very likely going to hit home for you. It does a great job of capturing the pain and uncertainty that comes with a prolonged job search. But at the same time, the game also succeeds at offering a critique of the exploitative nature of contemporary corporate culture. Throughout the interview process, we see Kenji struggling with the question of whether or not to be honest with his interviewer over issues like overtime, moonlighting, and experiences with past employers. Should he claim to enjoy working at jobs with excessive overtime? Should he pretend to like the prospect of having to work 3 jobs in order to pay his bills? Or should he be honest and let his interviewer know that he values both his physical and mental health? In other words, should he pretend to be a perfect cog in the corporate machine, or is he allowed to acknowledge his own humanity? Further complicating matters is the fact that Kenji's background is in video game design, yet the job he's interviewing for is that of a sales specialist. So, like many of us, he's put in the position of essentially begging for a job that he has no passion for and doesn't really want, but is desperate to acquire out of necessity. It's a painfully relatable situation, and one that I think just about all of us have encountered. For all the praise I'm giving this title, though, I do have 2 major complaints with Welcome to the Karoshi Club. The first is I wish that it could be a little longer. A full playthrough only takes about 15 or 20 minutes, and you're only able to attend 1 interview. I think it would be a lot more enjoyable and effective if we saw Kenji attending a number of job interviews and being forced to navigate through the conflicting desires of various potential employers, just like a real job search in real life. My second complaint has to do with the writing. It's very flowery and definitely gives the impression that someone behind the scenes went a little bit too crazy with the thesaurus at times. But even so, I found this to be a thoroughly enjoyable title, and I'd recommend it to anyone who's looking for a unique spin on the horror genre. Overall, Welcome to the Karoshi Club gets 8 out of work game designers out of 10. And if you're looking for a more Lovecraftian gaming experience, you might want to check out Lunatic Whispers. Oh, sorry, I meant Cthulhu Mythos ADV Lunatic Whispers. And if that isn't the most anime-sounding title I've ever heard, I don't know what is. Anyway, this 2022 Japanese release draws on a number of H.P. Lovecraft stories, including The Whisper in Darkness, The Dunwich Horror, The Curse of Yig, At the Mountains of Madness, and I believe Pickman's Model, among others. The premise of the game is that you, the player, wake up in a strange hospital bed with no idea where you are or how you got there. As you try to escape, you meet 2 college students named Reiji and Hatsumi who are also prisoners. The 3 of you are then tasked with unraveling the hospital's mysteries, as well as determining how you ended up in this situation to begin with. It's a fairly short, simple little game that you can complete in about 3 hours. And, as you might imagine, it's loaded to the brim with Lovecraft references. Unfortunately, the game designers did take quite a few creative liberties with the source material, so it does leave the story feeling a little muddled at times, especially if you're familiar with Lovecraft's writing. Also, one of the core game mechanics is that the success or failure of each of your actions is determined by the roll of a dice. So this is not a game of skill, but of luck. Aside from that, Lunatic Whispers is pretty much another typical point-and-click visual novel. You solve puzzles, collect items, and fight enemies in order to unlock various areas throughout the hospital during your efforts to escape. And since there are a number of different endings to achieve, there's a good amount of replayability here. Generally, I'd say that Lunatic Whispers is a decent game that both Lovecraft enthusiasts and those new to his works can enjoy. Overall, this game gets 6 imprisoned hospital patients out of 10. Next up on our list is a very short little game called Milk Inside a Bag of Milk Inside a Bag of Milk. And the game is about as weird as the title. According to the Steam store, this game is a short story about what sort of challenges everyday little things can be. Help the girl buy milk, be the first not to disappoint her. And that's pretty much the game in a nutshell. The story begins with a young girl heading off to the store to buy milk, but along the way she suffers from some fairly debilitating psychological defects which make the task nearly impossible. You, the player, get to decide whether you're going to help her along the way or respond to her strange eccentricities by mocking and insulting her. The game only gets stranger and stranger the longer you play, although it only takes about 10 to 15 minutes to complete. Probably the most interesting aspect of this game, and part of what makes it such a psychological experience, is that it breaks the fourth wall a number of times and addresses the player directly. At several points, the girl in the game even acknowledges that she's in a visual novel and starts basing her behavior on what she thinks a character in a visual novel should act like. It's a bizarre title and one that's garnered kind of a cult following since its release in 2020. Overall, I found this one to be pretty interesting, and I only have one gripe with it, which is the artwork. Milk Inside a Bag of Milk Inside a Bag of Milk is a pixel graphic game whose visuals are pretty hit and miss. At times the graphics look fairly good, but more often than not, you find yourself staring at what appears to be a mess of random pixels with no idea what you're supposed to be seeing. And for all I know, maybe that's the point. I mean, this is definitely the kind of game whose story will leave you wondering what the heck you just played once the game is over, so the messy visuals might just be part of the general style of the narrative. Anyway, I quite liked this strange little title, and I'd recommend it to anyone looking for a short, creepy gaming experience. Overall, Milk Inside a Bag of Milk Inside a Bag of Milk gets 7 bags of milk out of 10. Alright, next up we've got the 2023 release Homicipher. And ladies, apparently this one is for us. According to the Steam store, Homicipher is a female-targeted language deciphering and exploration ADV based on the concept of romance with horror men. Now personally, this was not my first rodeo. Having played Speed Dating for Ghosts, I'm pretty well accustomed to romancing the paranormal at this point. But what makes Homicipher stand out from other visual novels / dating sims is that this game plunks you down right in the middle of a gruesome horror game and tasks you with surviving and escaping from your unfortunate situation. As you wander around trying to figure out where you are and how to break free, you encounter a number of presumably dateable male figures such as Mr. Hood, Mr. Gap, Mr. Chopped, Mr. Silver, and Mr. Crawling. And I say that they're presumably dateable because unlike the rest of the titles on this list, Homicipher actually isn't a finished game. Currently there's a free trial available through Steam wherein you get to play the first chapter. The rest of the game will apparently be released on November 1st, 2024. So by the time you view this video, it might already be available. Maybe I jumped the gun a bit by including this title in this list, but based on what we have now, the game is thoroughly enjoyable and a genuine challenge to play. In order to survive, you need to figure out which of the creepy Bishonen you can trust, but in order to do that, you have to decipher their strange language. And in order to do that, you need to engage in various conversations with the figures you meet using the in-game notebook to mark down translations of the words you and your strange hosts exchange. Even in the free trial, there's plenty of replayability here as you become more and more familiar with the game's mechanics and with the strange language you're attempting to decipher. Overall, this is a truly bizarre premise for a video game, and one that I'm pretty excited to try out once the full game has been released. So far, I'd give Homicipher 8 strange, gruesome dating prospects out of 10. Alright guys, it looks like we've made it to the last entry on our list, the 2023 release, Scar of the Doll. This visual novel follows a girl named Asumi whose sister has recently gone missing. In an attempt to find her, Asumi travels to Tokyo to visit the laboratory where her sister works. Once she arrives, however, she finds herself drawn into a dangerous conspiracy that may end up claiming not only Asumi's life, but also the lives of everyone she cares about. It's a horror game with a bit of a science fiction twist, addressing themes of family, community, and identity. Of all the titles on this list, Scar of the Doll is one of the longer entries, taking about 3 to 4 hours to play through. You can die pretty easily by making the wrong decisions throughout the runtime, but if you do happen to die, the game will tell you exactly where you went wrong, so it's actually a pretty forgiving title in that regard. In fact, dying can actually give you valuable clues about where to go and who you can or can't trust, so in that sense, the game actually rewards exploration and taking risks. If I'm being completely honest, I didn't find this title to be the scariest or the most effective one out there, but once you find yourself drawn into the game's conspiracy, it does establish a decent sense of paranoia as you try to determine who's an ally and who might be an enemy. In terms of gameplay, Scar of the Doll is basically another standard point-and-click visual novel. And as for the story, the game definitely has some fear vibes, although unfortunately both the tragedy and the horror of this title could be better executed. In fact, if you have the money and the time, I'd actually recommend skipping this title and playing Fear instead, since that game tackles a lot of the same themes as this one, but does so in a much more effective way. Still, for the price of about $10, Scar of the Doll is enjoyable enough. My two major complaints with this game are its visuals and redundancy. In terms of the visuals, they can look pretty cheap through most of the runtime, and at several points throughout the game you'll see character models that just look downright unfinished. In terms of its redundancy, Scar of the Doll can feel pretty repetitive, particularly toward the beginning of the game. For about the first hour or two, Asami will not stop reminding you that her sister is missing and that she's worried about her. It sort of makes the beginning of the game drag, and at times can even make it feel kind of dry and boring. But the deeper you get into this title, the more interesting it becomes, so I'd say it's worth checking out if you can't afford Fear, or if you're just more into visual novels than first-person shooters. Overall, Scar of the Doll gets 6 missing sisters out of 10. And with that, it looks like we've come to the end of our list. If you've made it this far into the video, thanks for watching. And as always, this is the part where I ask what you guys think. Have you played any of the games on this list? What did you think of them? Do you have any other short little horror titles that you think should have been featured in this video? I'd love to know your opinions in the comments. Until then, see you next time.